Hello and welcome. It's episode 131 of Grow Yourself Up, and I'm delighted to be back with you this week. And this week I'm joined by a guest, Dr. Jenny Turner. So let me tell you a bit about Jenny, and then I'll tell you a bit about what we talked about in this episode. So Dr. Jenny Turner is a clinical psychologist and founder of Mind, Body, Soul Psychology. She's based in North Yorkshire and works online with people from all over the UK. Jenny is also a mum to a 4-year-old son. With an extensive NHS background in child and adolescent mental and physical health services, Jenny is now passionate about supporting mothers. A central theme of the work she offers is how we can all get our own needs met while we are caring for so many other people. Jenny believes that the care we receive, our boundaries, and our own healing are all fundamental to the care we offer as mothers and to our enjoyment of the process of mothering. She is also passionate about helping mothers to navigate through the emotions that society too often wrongly tells us that we're not meant to feel as mothers, such as resentment, ambivalence, anger, rage, trauma, shame, guilt, grief, exhaustion, and burnout. Jenny offers integrative therapy to her clients. She draws largely on systemic, societal, psychodynamic, compassion-based, and body-based trauma-informed models, such as polyvagal theory, as well as the therapeutic model of shame resilience developed from Brené Brown's research. So, Jenny and I had a really rich and varied conversation. As you'll hear, I was very excited in the beginning that she's also from the Southern Hemisphere. She grew up in Australia. And all the time I've known her on Insta, I hadn't heard her accent. So that was really fun. And we had a really kind of rich conversation covering a lot of stuff. So we talked a bit about traumatic births, about birth trauma. Jenny shared about her own birth, about shame, about relationships, about the challenges of cycle-breaking parenting, about how, there's can be so much perfectionism woven into that often and how we have to really push back on that for ourselves. We talked about perimenopause. Jenny talked about how she's been in perimenopause since she had her son, she thinks, and how she's really had to dig deep in motherhood. And I know that many of you will identify with this, really having to dig really deep in motherhood and sometimes just feeling like there's nothing left in the well. And how do we actually do that? It's a thing that many of us face. And so I hope that you really enjoy this episode, and let's dive right in. Hi, Jenny. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me. I'm so delighted to be here with you.
Cath, it's such a pleasure to be here.
And also I want to say I love hearing your Australian accent because I've known you on Instagram for years. And have I never heard you talking on Instagram? I don't know. And then when I heard you today, I was like, oh, goody, someone else from the Southern Hemisphere. So that feels really joyful to me. So there's so many things that we've touched on that we want to talk about. So much richness. But I'm going to start off by asking you to tell us a bit about your path to motherhood.
Sure. So I worked with mothers for years before I became a mother, which is absolutely part of my story. I am a clinical psychologist, and my background is in working in child and adolescent mental health services or child and adolescent pediatric health services. And so, however...
What does that mean, actually? Because this is all in the context of the NHS.
It's all in the context of the NHS, yes. So I worked in the NHS in the UK for 10 plus years. And so there's CAMS, which is Child and Adolescent Mental Health Services, where a young person would be referred if they had primary difficulty of what's considered mental health, and or behavioural challenges, and or neurodiversity as well. And then I moved from CAMS into paediatric services, which are psychology services based within a physical health hospital unit. So there isn't the necessity for the referral to really even be about mental health. It was more around an acknowledgement that having a chronic health condition is a life challenge that may require some psychological support. And for me, that really fit with my values a lot better, because I feel that the NHS Child and Adolescent Mental Health Services, I don't know, it's not a simple solution that I know of, but I do believe that when children require a diagnosis so young to get a service that is in some way not helpful, that is sort of as counterproductive as it is productive in getting young people support. And so I would always try to, if wherever the referral came from, to keep the child a child and keep the child sort of out of this system as much as possible. And so I did a lot of systemic work with schools. I did a lot of systemic work with parents. I did a lot of systemic work with social care when that was required. And in doing a lot of work in that way, I was meeting more parents than I was young people, particularly as I built my skills in working systemically towards the end of my work.
Yeah.
And I was also, therefore, I was working with mums, because 95% of the time it was mums bringing their child
who were coming with the children.
Appointment.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And with a systemic sort of thinking about the family system and how each person interacts in the family system, I ended up doing a lot of work with mums, just supporting the mums for their journey as a mum and supporting them to unpack their struggles that they had as a child that they could then see in their child. So a child might be referred for anxiety at age 8, and then within a few sessions I'd be talking to mum about her own experience of anxiety as a child and how that was met and how she has managed that throughout her life and what's it bringing up now for her that her child is struggling with that. So that was my the bulk of my experience with motherhood, really. And then I became a mother myself at age 40. So a big part of my story is believing actually that I wouldn't be a mother. So I had a really significant relationship end when I was in my early 30s, and I grieved for a long time.
I'm sorry.
It was so painful. It was the relationship that I thought would lead to marriage and children, and then it ended, and it was a really painful grieving process. And as part of that, I grieved the possibility to a degree of having a child, because I just thought, that's what we think, don't we? When we are single in our 30s, there aren't a lot of narratives around that for us as women, and it can be really painful and
it's very
really painful. But also, I must say, I was never a young person growing up believing I wanted to be a mother. So that's an interesting part of my story as well, that I haven't grown up having it as my end goal to become a mother. I remember saying as a child, I don't really want to be a mum, but I was a child and didn't really know what that meant. But I do remember grieving in my 30s and suddenly realizing, goodness, I think that was a part of my life that I did want. And then had an amazing time in my 30s. And it was actually a real sort of part of my growing up process, was ending that relationship and standing on my own 2 feet for the first time in my life and exploring and being playful and experimenting with jobs and friendship groups and activities and things. And then met.
So that really, I love the way you reference your growing yourself up, because it sounds there that you really came into a sense of your own power, from that kind of, that thing about a break, like a breakup or a breakdown doesn't have to be, it does often as a breakthrough. And it really sounds like you had
Absolutely. That was my experience. At the time of the breakup, it was just a break up and a breakdown, and I felt broken. I honestly felt that I had, and this is, again, to go a bit further back in the story, this was probably the first adult relationship I had that was really healthy. And I had had some unhealthy relationships previously where I'd very much been in a carer role, whereas this one felt reciprocal, it felt mutual, it felt really healthy relationship. And so I had come to grow up in that relationship in a bit.
Yeah.
And then when I lost it, I felt that I lost, I remember feeling this, like all that was healthy about me in this relationship was because of the relationship. And then I lost it and felt really bereft of so much of that growth, and felt that it had been a fluke of that person being with me. And then, as you say, it was such a painful process, but that was necessary for the breakthrough of realizing that indeed I did bring all of that growing up with me. And then, in fact, could not have grown up further in that relationship, that it needed to end for me to do more growing up. So yeah.
That's so beautiful.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of from like an expansion point of view, hearing about that. Because you're right. In your, I had a similar story. I think I broke up with someone when I was 34, and that was very unhealthy, actually. But still, he had a lot of money, and so I thought, well, I don't know. It was very seductive, that thing, and I wondered if there wouldn't be anyone else, and he didn't want to have children, actually, but. It's devastating then, because I literally felt I was on the shelf. I mean, I know that's a terrible patriarchal script, but that's kind of what I'd been fed.
Absolutely. It is what we're fed. Yeah, absolutely. It's really hard work to unpack all of that.
Yeah, and to kind of do what you said about being playful and having new experiences and actually grabbing a hold of your own life and not feeling like you're doomed to be a spinster when you're like only 32 or 33. You know, it's so ridiculous.
It is, absolutely. But also it's important, I think, to acknowledge that I didn't get to that place of playfulness without wading through all of that grief and shame that I was on the shelf, as you say. It took a good 2 or 3 years before I started having a good time as a single person. And I personally believe that I got to that place because I let myself grieve. I let myself feel all of those feelings. And that meant feeling that my life as a woman was over. Like these are the strong narratives you hear that, well, I am on the shelf now. It's pointless, and I remember really honoring that grief, and I declined invitations to weddings and things like that because I couldn't. It felt too hard. I couldn't be in that space, and that was absolutely part of my growing up. Of, as you say, finding your own 2 feet and honoring what my process was. That was the first time I did that in my life. And looking back, it was that process that allowed me to do that. And I think that's often, it's only when we hit the really challenging times that we need to dig deep and come back to ourselves and say, what do I actually really need now? So that was a massive part of my journey, definitely.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. I love hearing about that sort of phase of like being in the goo, before you become the butterfly.
Oh my goodness, yeah, that's exactly what it was like. Yeah.
And then tell us about how did you, then move into actually becoming a mother?
So I met my now partner, father of my child, when I was about 37, 30. Well, we'd actually known each other through mutual friends for a long time, but we started actually seeing each other when I was about 37. And we actually had quite a rocky start to our relationship. And I think because of this, I had become my own person. I knew I was okay as a woman in my 30s. I knew I didn't need this person to define me.
Yeah.
And so I remember we had this like year or 2 years of really a year and a half maybe, of really like laying down on the table what we each wanted and what we were each bringing, and the other person going, no, that doesn't work for me. And so, we had a lot of up and down in the beginning, actually, but I think that was really healthy. And it meant that when we did come together and we were on the same page, that there were no sort of surprises, really, because we'd thrashed out quite a lot. Of what wasn't going to work for us. And we still, at the end of the day, wanted to give it a go. So, and then I was 30, I remember being 39, and we were relatively new in the relationship. And my partner's 5 years older than me as well. And I remember when we first started dating, we'd had a conversation about sort of having missed the boat around children, because he's had significant relationships in the past as well. And so that was sort of our story for a year or two. And I think, again, that took the pressure off us in the beginning, needing to be together. It was like, I've grieved this. I can sort of take it or leave it. It wasn't that simple, but I've done this processing. I don't need you to bring this next phase into my life. And then we were really settled, and we moved in together, and I was 39. I think I was maybe 38 when we moved in together. And at sort of 38, 39, I was like, can we try to have a child? I know it's, physically possible. We could give it a go. So we did, and it wasn't straightforward. We had a year and a half of trying, I think, and I went, because of my age, went down through fertility, seeing fertility consultants and things, and had different appointments and procedures and checks and things. And then in the end, we did conceive without any IVF or anything like that. And actually, that's one of the really difficult moments of that fertility journey, actually, was being in a room with a fertility consultant. And I was there assuming that we were on this path so that we could explore IVF as and when we needed to. And I remember this consultant just saying, "Oh, so you've got IVF." And then she went, "Oh, hang on, how old are you?" And then she looked down and she went, "Oh, no, you've missed the boat for IVF. We can't do IVF. You're too old for that now." And she said it in...
Why? You mean...
Yeah.
So you mean the NHS won't fund it?
And
wow.
I had really not expected that, because I had friends in similar age groups, even a bit older than me, that were undergoing IVF through the NHS in different areas. So it was a real postcode lottery moment. And
Yes.
I just remember this gut punch to my stomach of how my entire trajectory potentially has just been swept away by this person. And there was no compassion, no understanding of the magnitude of the message that they were giving in that moment.
Wow.
And I'll remember it forever. And then we went on to be, and then you obviously start thinking about, could we fund IVF? And, it didn't close all the doors, but it certainly, I remember it being a gut punch. And then we were fortunate enough to conceive without IVF. Yeah, so I was 39 by that stage. I had a pregnancy that surprised me, again, due to the narratives around pregnancy. I never became a glowing pregnant woman. I struggled the whole way through. I didn't really enjoy being pregnant. I had terrible heartburn. I had terrible backache. I had low iron, so I needed to take tablets, which made me feel terrible. And I had anxiety as well. And I think because I'm quite an anxious person, and because of my age, and it felt like one roll of the dice, and it felt like anything could happen and we might lose this opportunity, this baby. And there was a lot of anxiety. And I was also...
It is a terrifying time. I really want to acknowledge that, because it's especially, I was also pregnant at 40, and I think I actually fell pregnant when I was 39. Yeah, but I got diagnosed with an anxiety disorder in pregnancy because I was so stressed about getting them out and about holding them. Basically, I had a miscarriage. Because they thought I had low progesterone. And so I honestly think that we should have time off to grow the baby.
Yeah.
Like, we shouldn't have to have so many life pressures at the same time as doing this life-changing thing of growing someone else inside of you. There's just not enough support.
No, I totally agree. And I was very fortunate in that another part of my journey to becoming a mother was burning out in the NHS at about age 37, 38. And at the same time, I remembered going to a GP and saying, "I'm thinking of becoming a mum. What should I be doing to support that?" And I remember the GP saying, "Cut out alcohol, take folic acid, and don't get stressed, reduce all the stress from your life." And I remember bursting out laughing, saying, "Shall I quit my job then?" And he went, "Maybe." Genuinely, if your body is getting those stress signals all the time, then it's not thinking it's a sort of safe time to create a baby. So that was a big part. And I was fortunate enough financially with my partner, we could afford for me to stop working. And that was when I started my private practice. And so I did have a lot more flexibility around pregnancy than I know a lot of people do. And then on top of that, it then became the COVID pandemic as well. So I did have a lot of sort of forced at home time, which was both a blessing, and there was so much grief associated with that as well for me.
Yeah.
So it was a really complex time. And I remember being really very sick in my first trimester. And I remember feeling really betrayed by all the portrayals of morning sickness on the TV shows and things, where a woman is in the early stage of pregnancy, can still get up, put their makeup on, go to work, and then they might go, oh, I feel a bit sick, and go to the toilet and be sick and come back and just carry on as they were. And that's what I had expected. I had expected to be fine and have these waves of nausea. And in fact, I felt physically ill, on the verge of throwing up 24 hours a day for more than 3 months. And I just couldn't make sense of it. And that doesn't help the anxiety either, I think, when you're in a situation that you didn't predict, that no one's told you about.
Yeah.
And then I remember those 3 months just doing so much lying down and feeling terrible, and eating just crisps, like it was all I could keep down. And then I felt better one weekend. I remember this so clearly. I felt better and we went for a walk. And then that was a Sunday, and it was fairly quiet around where we were living. And I was thinking, oh, that's odd. And then the Monday was when the lockdown started. So I had already essentially had 3 months of lockdown in my home. And then it was lockdown. And so I had a very sort of isolated pregnancy, really, with my son. Which I do think had its pros and cons, definitely. But yeah.
So he was literally born towards the end of 2020?
August 2020, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So that, I think, like the challenges around giving birth at that time and who could be there to support you, that's a whole trauma all by itself.
Absolutely, yes. And I would say I did have a traumatic birth, when on paper it would not look that way. And a big part of that was needing to go into scans on my own. And timing-wise, we were lucky that my partner could come to the 12-week scan, but by the time of the 20-week scan, I had to go in on my own. And I remember just I feel tearful talking about it. I just remember feeling so vulnerable and so anxious, and my heart breaking for all the women that I knew had already been in this position, that had received bad news, and not knowing if that was going to be me. And also picking up, because I was so grateful for my work in the NHS and my understanding of systemic factors, because I felt that the staff in the NHS at that time, I felt I was getting even less compassion than I normally would have done. And my sense of that, my sort of, we'd say in psychology, my formulation of that was that they were under so much stress and pressure at that time.
Yeah.
They were being asked by the government to work in ways that contradicted their values, that were taking them away from why they went into this career at that time. And it was so much vulnerability, so much fear, that my sense was that so many NHS staff just had to shut it down, just had to push it down and become quite robotic. And so, yeah, you had women in really vulnerable states going in, needing compassion, and just being met with quite robotic sort of interactions. That was my experience anyway. And again, I know that it's a postcode lottery, but I was certainly grateful for my understanding of what happens in a system when there's anxiety and when there's vulnerability, because I could think to myself, this is really hard, but this is not about me. And we were fortunate. We didn't get bad news. We did find out the gender of our son in a car park of the hospital instead of in the room. But at least we were able to do that together. The sonographer was able to write it down and put it in an envelope. So we did learn that together. And then I also remember going into hospital in labour on my own as well. And that
I'm so sorry, Jenny.
Being one of the most vulnerable moments of my life, and certainly contributing to trauma. And again, being met, I remember being in floods of tears. I mean, I think back now, and I think any other woman in that room might have thought I was losing that baby, because I was so vulnerable. I was so upset to have left my partner outside and my body be doing things that I'd never experienced before, and feeling quite scared. And it was 2 weeks early. I wasn't mentally prepared for it, and all of this, and going and not knowing where to go in the hospital. And, it's terrifying. It was, yeah.
It's terrifying.
It was terrifying. And then being met with, like, in floods of tears, I'm clearly in need, and saying, like, arriving and saying who I was. I just called, and just being met with, yep, take a seat. Instead of,
wow.
oh my goodness, are you okay? Can I get you anything? This is really hard. Where's your partner? Like, there was just no acknowledgement of the vulnerability, no holding, no containment. So yeah, that was it was a really tricky time. And at the same time, I'm so grateful that we didn't have bad news, and that, my son was well and healthy, and, all of that. And I think I really feel passionately about talking about birth trauma in this way, because I absolutely fall into that category of, there was no intensive care. There was no need for separation between me and, well, there actually was. I ended up needing my placenta surgically removed, which, again, I didn't know was even a possibility until I was being wheeled off to have it done. So there was separation at the beginning, but it wasn't prolonged. Within an hour, I was back with him, and I was healthy and well, and he was healthy and well. And I think that so many of us think, oh, well, then it can't be trauma then. What I'm experiencing can't be trauma because my baby's healthy and I'm okay. But I'm, again, so grateful for my awareness as a psychologist of what trauma is and what it's not. And my self-compassion practice and my shame resilience practice that led me very quickly to understand that even though I had a healthy child and I was okay, I had experienced a traumatic birth. And I feel that more women need support with that than they probably know about.
Absolutely. And I think that much of the struggles in early motherhood can be around feeling shame about how you feel about the birth and the complexity around that, and possibly some PTSD, but punishing oneself for kind of having that narrative, exactly you say about the healthy baby and I was okay. But actually so much of it is the lack of containment and the lack of respect for your views, or even being asked, and just feeling like a pawn being moved around in the system, and kind of ignored as if you're not even a person.
That's how it felt.
And so,
yeah. And I'm so grateful for the work of Make Birth Better and organizations like that are putting out that research that shows that. I think I heard someone else say on a podcast recently that it's up to a third of birth trauma is actually linked directly with those interactions with the staff, actually, that it's not to do with medical intervention or anything like that.
Yeah.
And that was absolutely my experience. And the shame is so powerful. I remember my partner taking a video of the moments after my son was placed on me for the first time. And I do feel really emotional saying this, but I feel it's so important to share it because it's part of my story. And also I'm almost certain other women have experienced this. But he took a video of my son on me, and I am in a trauma state in those moments. I'm not looking down at him and smiling and feeling joy and meeting the love of my life. I'm in a trauma state. I am staring, barely blinking, frozen, absolutely. And when I saw that video a few days after we got home, I burst into tears. There was so much shame around what sort of a mother greets their child like this for the first time. And just, how is this my video? How is this my story? How is this what happened for us?
Yeah.
And I'm, again, just so grateful for my work with mums and my knowledge of self-compassion and my practice of self-compassion and shame resilience that brought me through that, actually. And meant that I despite my shame, I reached out for support with that. I had an NCT group, and the leader of the NCT group kept saying, if anyone wants to talk through their birth experience, let me know. And to my knowledge, no one took them up on that because no one responded on the group. But then, to be fair, I also messaged separately and said, I would really like to take you up on that. And I spoke to her for, I think, 2.5, 3 hours on the phone, just sobbed and cried it all out. And the most powerful thing she did was listen. And then at the end, she said, some of what happened wasn't okay.
Yeah.
And I could cry now hearing it again, because that is so powerful for women when we are told, if you've got a healthy baby, if you've come out alive and well, then you have nothing that you need to be complaining about or worried about. And here was someone who listened to my story and said, you didn't imagine that some of that was not okay. And it was so powerful. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so healing and so beautiful. And I want to say, when you pose that question, why is this part of my story? What sort of a mother greets her baby like this? And a mother who's been traumatized is the simple, from a nervous system point of view, you had so many signs of danger sent to you. So going into freeze is the way you were trying to keep yourself alive. And we have to really kind of honor that. And what you said about that NCT lead is so beautiful, because there's like research that shows how impactful narrative therapy is immediately after things, and that it doesn't actually take that much intervention. It's a lot of talking and like exactly what you say, listening. And I wish there was much more of that on offer to everyone.
Absolutely. Yeah. I totally agree.
That's such a beautiful. I didn't even know. I didn't actually do NCT. So what a wonderful offering that is.
Yeah. And again, I don't know how lucky I was in terms of that particular NCT person, because I think it could be like a postcode lottery again. I don't know how it works. So it might be that not every NCT offers that. I maybe they do. And I do believe that individual differences between the professionals offering that listening service can make a huge difference to whether you feel less shame or more shame in that interaction. But I was certainly very, very fortunate and very grateful for and again, that's part of my growing up process before becoming a mother was learning the importance of asking for help. And it sounds so counterintuitive, because I think we have such strong narratives in our society about being grown up means you're independent, being grown up means you can sort things out on your own. But actually, for me, that's often a childhood trauma reaction, isn't it? I can do it on my own. And a big part of growing myself up was unpacking that and being able to say, I'm actually really vulnerable now and I need some help from outside. And that's absolutely served me on my motherhood journey. So I reached out for support with that birth trauma story. I reached out for support with my breastfeeding trauma, which was also really difficult and comes thick and fast after the birth trauma. And reached out to a pelvic health physio when I felt panicked about what I was feeling down there, because again, no one had ever talked to me about how that might feel.
Like how the vulva recovers.
Oh my goodness, no, exactly. And I remember just feeling panic, thinking I'm fully healed from my episiotomy, but I still feel like really swollen, like it doesn't feel okay. And I just felt like literally like the blood drained from me, and I felt panic. I was like, that means there's something really wrong with me, because no one's ever talked about this before. And of course, when you reach out for help, you learn that it's really common. And in fact, it's the shame that silences people, not the fact that it doesn't happen. It's, you're not alone with it. So yeah, that's been a massive part of my journey, is asking for help.
And the pelvic floor thing is particularly poignant because, just everything about our vulva, the vagina, like all our, if you were torn, if you had an episiotomy, we need so much more practical intervention around how to support ourselves, like a midwife who'll actually look at what's going on, because it's difficult to look at yourself with a mirror and to figure out exactly what's going on. But there's not enough, like often at a 6-week check, they may not literally actually look at, and I find it so strange the way we kind of have moved away from really paying deep attention to our body, and to, culturally and the systems that's happened. But I think there's a real claiming back of, like going to pelvic floor physios or pelvic floor doctors or going back to the gynecologist. But it's really difficult to access some of those services, particularly in this country, in the UK.
Absolutely. I mean, through the NHS, I got nowhere. I was very privileged to go private. Yeah, definitely. And I remember my, I think it was an 8-week check at the GP, and I'd been booked in with a male GP, and I mentioned my pelvic floor, and he said, "Oh, well, maybe come back and book in with another GP, that like a female GP that can have a look at that." And I thought, yeah, because as a new mum, I've got loads of time to just keep making different appointments. And, it just felt like, why would you book someone in? And this is quite integral to the check, and you're not going to check. It just felt infuriating. Yeah.
Yeah. And in some ways more shame, because there's a part of me who would think, why can't you look?
Exactly.
I mean, you've been trained for this.
Exactly.
Anyway. And I'm aware there's so many things I kind of want to ask you about. Tell us a bit about, so you've mentioned the shame resilience. Now, we know that shame and perfectionism always go together like this, and they kind of, Brené Brown always says that the opposite sides of the same coin. How did perfectionism impact you in motherhood? Did your shame resilience practice ameliorate that a bit, or did that come up? How was that for you?
Yes, I'm absolutely a recovering perfectionist. And definitely,
me too.
Can definitely resonate with the shame and perfectionism coming hand in hand.
Yeah.
And I think I'm really grateful for having discovered shame resilience before I became a mother, because I was letting go of my perfectionism before I became a mother.
Yes.
And I also had a really established self-compassion practice by that point as well. And I think self-compassion is integral to the shame resilience practice and integral to combating perfectionism. And so I've been on a journey with this. And for me, it started before becoming a mother. And yeah, it's so hard, isn't it? Because Brené Brown also talks about the difference between perfectionism and healthy striving, and how shame fuels perfectionism but doesn't fuel healthy striving. And I think that what I certainly brought to motherhood was a sense of wanting to do the absolute best that I could, and it feeling really blurry actually between, is this perfectionism or is it healthy striving around this? And so I think that alongside perfectionism, some of the ways that I tried to manage the vulnerability of early motherhood was to find out all the information, do all the reading, listen to all the podcasts, control the controllables, try to always sort of, and I think this is a sort of occupational hazard for me as a psychologist, but always trying to formulate, trying to problem solve, like looking at the different factors, right? Like doing assessments all the time and formulating and intervening in certain ways. And there is absolutely still an element of that being a flavor of perfectionism, absolutely. But I also really valued the knowledge around emotions being valuable, because I think part of and I'm just sort of, my mind's going off in so many different directions at the moment, and it's making me realize that another part of my journey to becoming a mother was having my own therapy at the age of sort of 27 to 32, which was really powerful in that growing up process, integral to the ending of that relationship that we spoke about actually. And it was the first time in my life that I learned to embrace my emotions, to feel my emotions, to let my emotions be, that some of my perfectionism was to hide my emotions, and to be neat and tidy and amenable and fit in everywhere. And actually that process of therapy really opened up me emotionally. And I remember that became a big part of how I worked as well with the families that I was working with, trying to support parents to allow their child to have big feelings and to support how that resonated through the parents and what shame that brought up and what trauma that brought up for themselves. And so I remember in those early days of being a mum, knowing that I couldn't stop my child from crying, but knowing that I didn't have to. And I remember this being a mantra of myself. Like, I'd hold him for hours and hours while he cried. And I would just say, you don't have to make him stop crying. Crying is healthy. You just need to be with him while he's crying. That's your job. Just stay with him while he's crying. Hold him while he's crying. Be gentle with him while he's crying. If he stops crying, that's okay. If he doesn't stop crying, that's okay. And I just remember saying that again and again, and taking deep breaths as well. Like just being like, how am I going to hold this baby crying for hours? I'm going to keep pacing around the room really gently, and I'm going to keep taking deep breaths to come back to my center. And yeah,
but what a lot that is.
Oh, I know.
Like holding a crying baby.
Oh my goodness.
I mean, I think the movement, like the walking and the breathing, does help, but it's so battering for our own nervous system and for our sensory system and for our attachment system if we weren't held as well. You know, there's so much, like all of that capacity building you're doing right there. It's a huge task.
It is.
You know, project. You've used the word project. Yeah. It's such a project of building that capacity, growing ourselves up in that way to contain those emotions. I mean, it sounds like your experience of your own therapy and then and like supporting families in that way would have been really helpful as kind of other data points.
Absolutely.
But I still think that, because I was also a recovering perfectionist before motherhood, I'd done so much work on letting go of control, letting go of people pleasing, letting go of perfectionism, but they reared their heads massively in early motherhood because, well, the way I explain it, the way I kind of explained my model is that, you know, when we're in a stressed state, we go back to our oldest coping strategies. And we've almost lost the capacity to remember some of the other things like shame resilience, I had some compassion for myself, but it also felt that when there's so much anxiety, it feels like absolutely imperative to get it perfect, you know, because you're trying to keep someone alive.
Oh my goodness, that sense of responsibility. I'd never felt anything like it. No, it's really flooring, isn't it? It really, it's really powerful. It's really scary. It's such a vulnerable time. Yeah, even with all that knowledge. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's fascinating, this idea of having all the knowledge, but like we each only have the body and the nervous system and the somatic memories and the experience of our own childhood that we have. We can't suddenly go, okay, so I know all of this, and now I'm going to like hopefully build that capacity that I didn't get in childhood. Like if we didn't have it, we have to build it.
Exactly right.
We just only have our own body, and I find that it's so frustrating sometimes, actually.
I agree.
But we have to be so gentle.
I agree. And I think I don't think this gets talked about enough, that it's a real point of tension for new parents now, because there is so much written now and available now and on podcasts now about the importance of allowing your child to have big feelings, of allowing your child to be themselves, have body autonomy, have choice, have control, and all of that. And that's really admirable. And I agree that is healthy for a child. But when a parent is reading that and hearing that intellectually and trying to put that in place, and that then what they're experiencing in their body is so many danger signals, as you say, because these big feelings haven't been safely integrated into their own being, their own sense of self. And I think it's really putting parents in an impossible situation at the moment of having the information about what their child needs without always getting the information that you needed it to. And if you didn't get it, then however many books you read, however many podcasts you listen to, it's not your frontal lobe that you're responding with, it's your nervous system. And that is what needs healing. that is what needs attention and care just as much as your newborn baby needs that. You need that as well. And I think it's a really impossible dilemma.
And that's why we're here.
Exactly.
That's the whole gist of Grow Yourself Up, because I'm
Yes.
like, we have to stop punishing ourselves with that perfectionism, because it's like we're building that capacity as we go. And I get reminded about this all the time, of like the capacity of my nervous system, or why sometimes I might need to shut down in motherhood, why I feel, that kind of glazed feeling. And what you said about, if I go into freeze, sometimes there's nothing else we can do. We've only got what we've got. This is my only body. This is my only tool. Do you know what I mean? And we need so much like generosity towards ourselves. And what you talked about the family system, applying that generationally and just looking and thinking, this is not what was done. And this is not, my grandparents didn't do this, my parents didn't do this. So I can't expect to shift it all in one generation. I think we have to hold tightly onto that,
Absolutely. Yeah, I think the term, and other people have said this, but the term cycle breaking feels very perfectionistic. And it's more about cycle awareness, cycle shifting, cycle compassion. I think that's far more realistic and nourishing idea for parents.
Yeah, exactly. And Jenny, tell us about, I'm just noticing what our timing. Tell us about how, you made a comment when we were chatting earlier before we started recording about systems and children. And tell us about how your kind of knowledge from your systemic work and your kind of fantasies about how children's services would be developed. What have you noticed about that in motherhood? How have you learned to really advocate for yourself and your child and like be in your power? And you also touched on that there's been so much grief for you around that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So my son, bless him, has had a lot of contact with a lot of different services because he has health needs. So we've had more health appointments than most, more sort of, even interactions with pharmacies for scripts and interactions with GPs for repeat scripts and all sorts of things. And at the same time, we were lucky, privileged enough that we were able to make decisions that worked best for us as a family. And so he stayed at home with me and my partner until he turned 3, really. And then he went to a nursery because we felt that by that point he was, I think, really craving some different stimulation. And he's really bright and he's really social. And so I thought it would be really good for him by 3. So that was our journey into the schooling system. We went for a nursery that was attached to a school. And I had just, with all of these systems, all of these services for children, I have been shocked and have had so much grief at how they just don't really seem to be set up for children when I had assumed they would be. And I should have known this because that's why I left CAMS, because it wasn't set up for children. It was, goodness knows what it was actually set up for. I'm not sure it met the needs of the staff very well either, but in fact, I know it didn't. So I should have known this. And in fact, my history of that systemic knowledge meant that I caught myself quite early in sort of assessing these systems I was sending my son to and sort of catching, right, I thought we would get help here, but actually you just want to sift us through a system really quickly. You just want him to be a number and you just want to crack on with the next appointment. And I think I quite quickly in each case realized that. And what that meant was I could, as you say, then step into my power to advocate for him, which is another massive part of growing ourselves up, I think, as parents, because another way that I coped in childhood was to stay in the middle, to stay average, to stay not needy, to stay hidden, to stay quiet. And so a big part of my journey as a mother has been stepping into this place,
Your
my
voice.
voice,
Yeah.
to support my child's individual needs, which is very challenging and healing at the same time, of where my own individual needs have been neglected through time. So yes, I mean, so many different directions to go with this, but I think the biggest grief for me has been the school system. That I had assumed that the schools were built to meet the needs of children.
Yes.
Which, I mean,
but actually they're like industrial revolution relics
indeed.
to create
well,
workers.
exactly. And
Yeah.
I only learned that this last year or so by like, why is there such a mismatch between what I think my son is coming here for and what you think he's coming here for? Why is there such a mismatch of that? And then did my
Yeah, it's true.
research.
Like need does not equal provision in any way.
Not in any way. And provision seems to be around crowd control, around compliance, around, those two things really. And when you have a child who, again, another impossible dilemma for parents, you've been raising them on the advice of experts to not be compliant, actually, to have choice,
Exactly.
to have feelings, to express big feelings. And then you send them into a system with all best intentions for them to be told, oh, no, don't cry. We don't know. Pack it all up. You're fine. Everything. Why are you crying? No. And I really was grateful for my knowledge of coming from mental health services and emotional health services, and B, my therapy work and growing up work that I'd already done, to then put all that together and say, oh, no, this isn't okay for my son, but I still want him to come here. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to create my own sort of graded entry into your nursery class. And part of that is I'm going to sit in the class with him for some time, and then I'm going to leave, but only for 20 minutes, and I'll only be around the corner, and I can hear him crying, so I can assess the cry, and I can hear if I need to come back, and then we'll gradually build on that. And I was absolutely in full psychologist mode as well as full mother mode for those first 3 months of him starting nursery, and just felt that there was no one, no one really helping from the school's perspective. But at the same time, I want to be really clear that my sense was the teachers in the class were lovely people and did want the best for my child, but we just had different ideas about that was due to our training. And we had different ideas about how that could be provided for because of the resources available. And that, I think I'm not having a go at the teachers, I'm having a go at the system, the way the whole system has been built, the training that filters down, the research that filters down, and that research that doesn't filter down through those teaching qualifications.
Well, none of the attachment, I don't think any of the attachment research filters down, and the provision of resource to facilitate that sort of thing, because really lots and lots and lots and lots of children struggle with separation anxiety, and it's nothing to do with any brokenness on any case. It's just that they need to feel safe with their caregivers, and they may need more time for that to happen. But the dominant narrative from nurseries and schools is drop them off, even if they're screaming, we'll pull them off you and they'll be fine when you leave. And it's not that they'll be fine, it's that they'll go into shutdown. And it's so kind of devastating on so many levels, because how wonderful, first of all, that your school or your nursery let you do that, because some people will refuse that, some settings, and also that you had the capacity to do that.
I mean, I don't think I did have the capacity to do it. I mean, I barely had the capacity to do it, I think. I've had such a tough time as a mum in those first few years, to do with COVID, to do with feeling isolated, to do with birth trauma, to do with breastfeeding trauma, to do with my son's health needs, to do with moving 200 and something miles up to Yorkshire. It had been a really stressful time. And it's only later looking back that I realized I was also in perimenopause at that time. So my body was literally screaming at me that I needed more care for me. But because of the stresses of motherhood, I was kicking the self-care can down the road, having previously been quite good at it, and just in the early years of motherhood thinking, well, the maths just doesn't add up. There's no time to look after me and look after my child, so I'll look after me later. Once he's in school, I'll look after myself. And then I was on my knees when it came to that September that he was due to start. I was literally on my knees, and I needed him to go in, and I needed to have my 3 hours a day. And then he didn't. And I had to dig deeper than I have ever dug as a mother into my well of capacity. And it very nearly broke me, I think. It really did. And it was such a really tough time, like a really, really tough time. And not only was it the sort of doing the mental load of developing the plan, and we were making social stories at home. I'm lucky that I have a sister who's a deputy head teacher in Australia, and so she was sending me resources and sort of like how to help. And it sounds like they have a more supportive system over there than we do here. So she had lots of great ideas, but that involved a lot of more work at home. Like I was making social stories of the nursery and home and building links between them and things like that.
Yes, for him. Yeah,
for him, yes, exactly. So he could take a copy of this story into nursery and sort of build a bridge between the two. And there was all of that practical stuff, but then there was also the emotional load of when he did go in and could manage 20 minutes or half an hour. Bless him, his little nervous system was pushed well beyond its window of tolerance. And so we were then having not only all of that stress of getting him in, but then there would be so many meltdowns at home, so many big feelings. And you'd think, but when you dropped him off and left him and all the tears and all the, that was the hardest bit of the day. And it just never was. It never was the hardest bit of the day. There was always harder bits of the day. And then the sleep was disrupted because of all the stimulation. I think my son's almost certainly highly sensitive. And so he was processing so much. You could see his little brain processing so much. And I mean, that astounded me. My research very quickly led me to discover that 1 in 5 children, perhaps even more, are highly sensitive. That's a significant proportion of all children we're sending into schools. And the nursery staff had never heard of this term of high sensitivity. And it's integral to how a young person steps into the room, what they're noticing, what they're picking up on, the sounds, the stimuli, all of that. And yes, I agree. There's just this I call it old school, this really old school idea of just drop them off, don't say goodbye because that will upset them, just sneak away. It just goes against everything in my intuition as a mother, it goes against, but it also goes against everything I know as an attachment professional, a professional trained in attachment. I did feel really strongly that I was going to go in and do an attachment-based introduction of him into that nursery and be there while he built relationships with the staff there. And yes, I was fortunate that nursery allowed me to do that. And if they hadn't, I would have taken him out because it's non-compulsory. He didn't have to be there until they're 5. And so I would have taken him out and I would have found a school. And again, I'm very aware of my privilege to say that. But I think some of us do have privilege and don't feel we can exercise it exactly, because a school system seems so daunting to our. We sort of put our trust in it, don't we? We put our faith in it, and we say, well, that must be what's best for our child. When actually, we often know what's best for our child, and if the school's offering something different, if we do have the privilege, we are allowed to say, this is not okay, and I'm going to find a solution.
Exactly. And I think I've done that at various points in our journey, but it's been terrifying, like taking them out. I've taken them out of 2 places, actually. But the first place we took them out of, we got delivered a message, which I won't go into, but was very much at odds with our values and around expectations for children and various different things. And we elected to home educate. And it was terrifying. It felt kind of brave, but it was terrifying for many reasons. not the least of which, like, you worry about like services just generally. Like, are they going to think you're doing something bad? It's very terrifying, actually, I think, doing this type of advocating, and being very brave. But it is also what I've noticed on this sort of journey, because I mean, we're still ongoing with this journey, is like just taking the first step. The path forward is very unclear. It's kind of muddy, basically, but taking the next step to give a bit of a relief to the family in general, or to your child, you can just immediately feel in your body when it feels right.
Absolutely. Yeah. And again, I think that's a big part of growing ourselves up, isn't it? It's noticing in our body when something doesn't feel right and doing something about that. And even if we can't do anything about it, but just acknowledging, this doesn't feel right to me, I'm not imagining that. It was so powerful for us.
Yes.
Yeah.
But we're not, I mean, I think that's the kind of essence of embodiment, but we are mostly raised to be disembodied.
Absolutely. That's been my experience. Yeah.
Because we're kind of more easy to control when we're disembodied,
Yes.
And now tell us about, because I'm again aware of like where we are in our conversation and everything. What I know from some of the stuff that you've shared and some of the stuff we talk about is how integral caring for yourself has been, and really turning back to face yourself and tend to yourself in all the ways. How do you weave that in alongside the busy job of being a mother and your own work? Like, how do you give yourself practices, or go walking, or sit on the sofa and read a book, and kind of give yourself that little and often self-care, even if it's only 10, like, what are some of the things that you find really useful?
Such an important question. I think I had to realize that I couldn't kick the can down the road anymore. That there had to be ways that I cared for myself every single day. That this is not a negotiation around I'll get to self-care when, because
like in 10 years or
it's
something.
relentless. Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I think, had my son not struggled in the way that he did, I may not have learnt this lesson. With nursery, I mean, but because he did, I had it earmarked that September was when I was going to start looking after myself. And in fact, it became when I dug deeper than ever as a mother into supporting him.
Yeah.
And that really depleted me. And so it was a real lesson of, I can't allow myself to be that depleted anymore. I just can't.
Yeah.
And I was also, again, really grateful for my work in the NHS and my own therapy and all that whole growing up journey previously, because I did know in my mind somewhere that a carer needs care. I did know that. That was my activism in the NHS. I butted heads with so much management in the NHS because I kept pointing out that their plans for service provision did not take into account the needs of the carers, the needs of the workers in the service.
Yeah.
And I would certainly advocate for myself in that regard. I would say, no, I can't work overtime for free. No, I can't take on another 20 assessments this week. That's not realistic. I can't. It's not safe for me to not catch up on my admin and take on more people. That's not a safe provision. I can't skip my lunch break every day. So that was my activism. And
well done.
Yeah, I mean, eventually got me burnt out and kicked out of the NHS, I think. But I didn't win against that system. But I feel like it was...
But you preserved yourself.
I did preserve myself. Yes, thank you. Yes, you're right about that. I did preserve myself. And sometimes that's the best we can do, and walk away from a really harmful system. And then it's interesting, actually, that then this lesson came back again in motherhood, except I didn't want to walk away from motherhood.
We can't really, can we?
Yeah, I mean, I actually I didn't, whether I could or couldn't, I didn't want to. I was really clear about that. I had wanted to walk away from the NHS when I walked away from the NHS because I couldn't get my needs met in the NHS. And and I reached a similar burnout. I reached a similar level of burnout in parenthood, and thought, but I don't want to walk away. So there needs to be a different solution. And that was when the penny really dropped around, this isn't I care for my son or I care for me. That's a very, I think, patriarchal, capitalist, sort of black and white way of thinking about care and self-care, that they're in opposition to each other. And actually, this real sort of storm that I ended up in around perimenopause and supporting my son with nursery and just falling apart was sort of crystallizing of this idea that no, they're not in opposition to each other. And the idea that they're in opposition to each other keeps us all trapped and struggling, which means we then pour money into this capitalist machine to make ourselves well again, which, it's a whole different conversation, isn't it? So I think that was key, was really hitting rock bottom and feeling like I can't allow this to happen again. And my self-compassion practice has always been foundational. And as part of that, this idea of common humanity, that we are human, that we're all human, we all struggle, we all suffer. And I sort of extrapolated that in my mind to be, okay, so I'm human. What does a human need? A human needs enough sleep. I haven't had enough sleep in the last 5 years. I haven't. A human needs to be hydrated. I often don't drink enough water. I make sure my son drinks enough water, but I often don't drink enough water.
Yeah.
Humans need sunlight. Yeah. Humans need sunlight. Humans need rest as much as they need movement. And I started looking into these like really basic sort of human needs. I didn't really even call it self-care. I called it like, what are my human needs? I need to get them met. And as that just sort of started snowballing in terms of learning about the things that I was putting into myself as a human that were counterproductive to what my human body was trying to do. So I gave up things like alcohol. I gave up caffeine. I thought more about what I put into my body to fuel it. I learned about circadian rhythm, and I try to align myself with that as much as I can. But the caveat to all of this is that I do it in fractions some days, with the idea that doing something, a fraction of something for myself in a day is better than doing nothing. And it means that I'm more likely to build on that tomorrow or next week when I can.
Absolutely.
And so things like going for a walk every day became really important, and prioritizing that walk being in nature as much as I can. But there are some days I can't go for a half-hour walk, so I go for a 5-minute walk or a 10-minute walk. And just that combination of what do I need as a human and how can I provide fractions of it compassionately for myself have been really, really important. And also things like, I know the move up here was really stressful for us. Moving from Kent to Yorkshire was incredibly stressful with a toddler. I'm just thinking he was about 20 months old at the time. And yet, looking back, it was also a foundational part of my self-care, because the move meant that it was very much a financial self-care decision. Because had we tried to buy what we have here in Kent, we would have been crippled financially, and we would have been on a knife edge every month financially. And so we made the decision to give ourselves financial breathing space, to give ourselves financial buffer, which means that my nervous system is on less of an alert every day.
Yes.
And also we were able to buy a bigger house, so there was more space and spaciousness around me rather than everything sort of piling in. And I think, having come from Australia, I've lived in tiny spaces in the UK, in the south of the UK, compared to what I grew up with in Australia. And coming up here and being able to afford a bigger house felt like I was coming home to a space that felt like I could breathe in it. And so there are some big decisions as well, I think, that fall under self-care that just create that sort of ease.
Absolutely. Yeah, I really agree with you about that. I think because the context that we give ourselves is so important every day. Because if we are in a place which is like, if our visual field is very crowded, if our spatial, like our own space for our body is very crowded, because we all have to be on top of each other all the time, that adds so many danger signals from a sensory perspective.
Absolutely.
And I also grew up in South Africa, where there's much more big open space. And I think it's wonderful to move to the country. I would also really love to do that, hopefully. Because I think it just having all that nature around you. I mean, I know you're near a town and everything, but it's still that spaciousness and the signals of safety that we get from our nervous system just makes such a massive difference.
I agree. I do not regret the move up here. It's been amazing. And we do have woods we are close to a town, but we've got woods 3-minute walk from our house. And it makes it's saved my life, really, if I'm honest. Like it sounds dramatic, but perimenopause could have broken me. And I feel that this resource of where we ended up moving to, both taking the financial pressure off the space and the fact that we've got this nature so close by, it's been a sort of lifeline for me. And just also thinking about the danger signals that I try to reduce for myself. I don't wear skinny jeans anymore, which sounds so silly, but it cuts off. It creates a sense of danger in my stomach area, and it prevents me from breathing deeply. And breath has become such a foundational self-care practice for me, to take deep breaths. And it was so interesting, actually, yesterday, for lots of reasons, I reached the end of my tether with my son and I got very cross and I was very shouty and he got shouty back. And then he said, "Mummy, you need to take some deep breaths." And I said, yes, I do. But I don't really,
now get him so I can take him.
I'm doing that right now, but you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
It's that breathing has become foundational for me. And so I really started to notice what was getting in the way of my breathing, and restrictive clothing really gets in the way of my breathing. And so I bring myself comfort every day by wearing jumpers like this and elasticated waists and tracksuit pants and, comfy shoes, sneakers. Like, I just feel like that's really foundational to me as well, making myself as comfortable as possible.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Because I'm wearing a dress that feels too tight for me now because I love the pattern on it. But I think you're absolutely right around, because we are taught to try and pour ourselves into, like as women, if we consider the male gaze and what's important or what's considered important, our comfort is way down on the priority list. It's just, do we look good? And things like Spanx, I sort of so ambivalent about those sort of things because of what are we trying to teach ourselves about how safe our bodies are and how how sucked in and constricted they need to be, because constriction and bracing is a way that and like holding our breath is a way we reduce our feeling and the way we reduce the impact of things in the moment. So, if we're constantly squeezing ourselves in our clothes, in some sense we are bracing, which is not helpful.
It's putting ourselves into a fight or flight state. Like, we're tensing everything. That's putting ourselves into a stressed state. Yeah,
a stressed state. Yeah.
It's really counterproductive. Yeah.
It's effective, though, to reduce the way you're feeling, like that kind of breath holding.
Yes.
Anyway. Jenny, this has been so wonderful. So wonderful. Thank you for taking the time to be with us. Tell us about how people can connect with you and work with you in your practice, if you've got any spaces. How can they connect with you?
Firstly, it's been such a pleasure, Cath, to speak to you. Thank you so much for having me. I've loved this conversation. So people can follow me on Instagram. I'm Dr. Jenny Psychologist. People can sign up to my Substack, where I do talk a lot about self-care around perimenopause, balancing that with motherhood and working. That URL, I believe, is mindbodysoulpsychology.substack.com.
And it'll be in the show notes.
Brilliant. Thank you. And yes, I do currently have some space. I'm based in North Yorkshire. So if you're also based in North Yorkshire, I can offer some face-to-face therapy appointments. And I do have a handful, maybe 2 or 3 spaces for that at the moment. And if you are online, I also just have 2 slots available at the moment. I mean, obviously it depends when this comes out, doesn't it? But yes, it's always worth getting in touch with me and checking, because I am trying to work more at the moment as well. So yeah.
Okay, well, that's nice to know. And do you work with people globally or just the UK?
Just the UK, actually. It feels important that I know how the system works where people are plugged into. So yeah, you need to be registered with a GP in the UK to work with me.
Okay. Wonderful. Thank you so much. This has been really, really joyful.
I agree. Thank you.
And I'm going to go and practice some self-care after this.
Me too.
Good. Take good care.
Bye.
Lots of love.